Great. Good to meet you all. Thanks for the kind invitation and also the nice introduction. Yeah, my name is Moritz Stefaner. I work as a self-employed truth and beauty operator. That's my official job title. And that's the perks of being independent. You can make up your job title. And yeah, as Martin has mentioned, I've been doing database for a while now and did over the years all kinds of different projects, some very experimental, some with scientists, some with corporations, some self-initiated. And yeah, actually the last few years, or maybe starting 2018, 19, I got more interested in building tools that really have a clearly defined purpose and or things that last and have a lasting impact. And so I worked a bit with, or a few years actually, with Deutsche Bahn, the German railway, together with Christian Lesser, who is also here. And also at some point, yeah, the country called in person of, first an agency, Cosmonauts and Kings, who were working with the German Federal Ministry of Health, and I helped them with the German vaccination dashboard, and also then later the German Foreign Office. And so I got into this lucky position of being independent database designer, but still being able to work in the public sector and work on exciting, very data-heavy projects, and always around how can we make complex data, complicated data more accessible to wider ranges of people and make it more accessible overall. When you think of data visualization, often people think of dashboards, right? And everybody, has these images in their mind. Like usually you have like some big numbers, and then maybe it looks a bit too technical, and then you put an icon next to it or a little circle around it, so it's a bit nicer. And I think that's like one class of dashboards I like to call number decoration, where people just struggle to somehow make dull numbers a bit more exciting, right? But I think that's not really helping much in actually surfacing patterns or understanding anything. And then people say, yeah, but I want to drill deeper and understand all the details, and it should be interactive and so on. And then you often end up with something like this, which is like the approach I like to call, here's all the data, good luck, right? And usually in these types of dashboards, every person involved has their personal drop-down that they ask for somewhere in the process, and just becomes this big mess, right? And what we like to do as data designers is somehow find something in the middle, like don't make anything so simplistic that you don't see any patterns really, and open up the data to exploration and to finding all the patterns, but still guiding the experience in a way that makes it very effortless and easy and seamless, and also crafted to a purpose, not generic, right? And so, yeah, my first involvement was in the Corona crisis for the German government or the administration. You might remember at this time we had a lot of these Esri dashboards. They were basically just a patchwork of different charts, and you were just basically trying to make sense of all these big numbers and the charts and the maps, and sort of squinting at them and figuring out if things might be improving at some point. And Studio Nantes, agency here in Berlin, and I were approached at the same time, and so we teamed up for the German vaccination dashboard, and we tried to sort of reinvent this whole genre of public health dashboard a bit on this project, which was very ambitious because we had literally only weeks to do it. But we still sort of said, okay, let's do it. Let's try and make the German vaccination data. So it's not about the infections, but it's really about the vaccination campaign. Let's make it more accessible to everybody in Germany, ideally, and make the numbers really easy to understand. And so this was this IMF dashboard or vaccination dashboard project that we worked on. By now it's archived, luckily. So, although, some more vaccinations would still be in order probably, but here's a recorded version I can show you. So here we had on the beginning, like just a big bold text and just the most important numbers. And then as you scroll down the page, you could see a little clock showing the speed of vaccinations, basically. If we had like each vaccination across the day, all the vaccinations happening on one day in Germany. And then you had further ways of drilling down into the data, seeing by the federal state or the different Bundesländer, or seeing the data split up by age groups and so on. So more and more details unfolded, but the sort of this entry was very simple, very bold, very straightforward. Has anybody used the dashboard? Are there any how much did you do it daily or hourly? So some people were really quite addicted, and others didn't quite want to know. Yeah, so Yeah, and so the way we designed the page is also very much with a focus on mobile use, because we had a hunch a lot of people would be using it on mobile. In fact, it was 2/3 mobile, 1/3 desktop. And so that was a good call. And it's always a good idea anyways, because whenever you do a mobile first design, as some of you might know, it forces you to think about the sequencing of things really well, about the chunking, like what is one unit that should be on one small screen together, about the visual hierarchy, or also the information hierarchy and the focus. What we also sort of really heavily emphasized on this project is this idea that text could also be like a chart type, which sounds a bit like counterintuitive, because you bring in these fancy data wizards and then they just generate big text with like numbers. But it played a big role in the project, and we used it both standalone, so that we had this data generated text, but also in combination with charts. And the big upside of text is really super low barrier. You don't need a legend or anything. It's easy to interpret. So a chart might already be a border or like a threshold that you have to cross in terms of statistical or visual literacy. It's screen reader friendly, obviously. So if you use it in addition to a chart, you already have the screen reader text. And it's easy to share on social, like for copy paste and so on. And so we really had this sort of chart component text that we made a lot of use on. The other, I think, design principle we had is that we said we want to have the same data, but show a lot of different perspectives depending on what individual users' interests are in a given moment, right? And so, for example, we always had this number, like how many doses were administered over time, and it's always the basic same data set, right? But we showed it as a single number in this clock. That's just a very like visceral, simple way of showing just a speed. Like it's just one data point, actually, the average speed of vaccination. Then we showed a weekly trend for those people who did the daily checking and wanted to see, how is the whole week doing? And then we had these more long-term analytical charts for people maybe arguing about the overall success of the campaign, or what should we do next, and so on, which have a much more strategic view, right? But it's always the same data, but presented in different ways. And often people try to have the one chart that does it all, but you have to fail with that. And so if you respect that different people have different interests in the same data, then you can use different forms of representation. And that's also something I try when I work with my clients, make very clear that we are not just the people decorating the numbers, but that we have actually quite strong opinions on how the data should be aggregated or combined or brought together with other data, or what the whole framing of the data set is, right? So it's never just about, just show me the numbers, right? But it's much more about, okay, what are the different perspectives we need to surface, right? Yeah, and this clock was probably the most controversial feature of the website. So some people loved it, some people hated it. But to us, it was really a way to make these large numbers, like 173,000 vaccinations per day, right, a bit more visceral and give people a sense of different approach to what the speed of the vaccination campaign is. Because is 150,000, is it a lot or not? It sounds like a lot, but maybe if we have 80 million people in Germany, it still takes a long time, right? And so and you have the same with like large budgets or large numbers of deaths, right? It's the larger the number gets, the more we lose touch with what it actually means. And by bringing in this clock, on the one hand, we emphasize, okay, it's all individual people, right? And it's often something that's successful in data design if you bring it back to an everyday or human level. And the second thing is because the speed was so close to an actual clock speed. So we realized that at some point, it's roughly a second per day, right? So we knew that going in. And so we said, like, it's so close to an actual clock that people will have a fine sense of, is it slightly faster or slower? And that was actually confirmed, that people had a really good sense of, hey, the clock is faster today, even though it was just 10, 20% faster. Right? And that's sort of, unique opportunity to do something like this. Yeah, and some people were like, maybe I'm starting to get a bit strange, but I like to watch the vaccination clock for a few minutes. Good news for in between. So there's also this emotional aspect. There's constant progress, right? There's something happening. Yeah. Saturday, a good day to stare at the vaccination clock. So that's, a bit sad too, but those were the days. Other people were like, oh, this clock makes me furious, pure propaganda. You know, the numbers are emotionalized and it looks much faster, but we need to make it faster. Yeah. So it was the most divisive feature I think we had on the website. Yeah. But I think this person got it exactly right. It's like, yeah, sort of looking at the clock, and we can see the numbers of acceleration every 0.5, every 0.7 seconds. Suddenly you have numbers you can work with a bit also in communication that are a bit more tangible. Yeah. Similar idea was behind these milestones. So we knew going in, it's going to be a long road, right? It's going to be very little vaccinations at the beginning, 1% of people, 2% of people. And everybody was already like, oh, Jesus, yeah, this pandemic needs to end. And so we said, okay, let's introduce some in-between goals, not just the final goal, but okay, let's celebrate the first million or the first, like, or the so many people or so many doses delivered. Like, let's have some in-between goals again, so that we have some good news also to cling on to in between. So as you can see, we're thinking a lot about also the emotional impact of certain data representations. A lot was happening also on social media. So we thought a lot about the dashboard being also present on other platforms. And we did a smart trick where we regenerated that preview image every day. So basically, we always showed the live numbers in everybody's LinkedIn or Twitter feed as a little badge. So we sort of little Trojan horse to get our numbers there. It was kind of hard to get them to refresh all the time. So it was a lot of manual copy pasting and hash resetting involved, but it was worth it. And while we were there, we were generating stuff already. So we said, like, okay, this little icon you see here, wouldn't it be cool if it's the real data? And we're like, yeah, it would be cool. So of course we did that. Why not? Weird flex, but yeah. And then, of course, a lot of importance was like to internationalize the page so that actually everybody in Germany would have a chance, or most people, to read all the data, and to think about that we're not just the endpoint, but we went through all the effort to make the data workable for us that came from RKI, so we also shared it with other parties or other widgets and sort of played this role of a little node in a larger information network. You know. On the process, as I mentioned, it was very short notice and very like hands-on, the whole project. And so we basically mostly did it in Miro. And so copy-pasted a lot of stuff and, like, you know, you just quickly scrambled to get something together very soon. And then built out the whole website more or less in the browser as the data was coming in. So whenever we got a new Excel sheet from RKI, you know, we was like, okay, what can we do with that? What can we do with that? Then there were new vaccination types coming in. So it was really like a rolling process of refining the page every day, more or less. So every day we had a release with the new data, and there might have been new features, or there might have been updates or not, depending on the situation. Yeah, but in a way it also forced us again to be very lo-fi and smart and agile. And maybe if we have had the time, like years to build this, maybe it wouldn't have been so simple and nice. So I think these constraints also help to focus on what actually matters. Yeah. So of course, big team involved, collaborative work with Studio Nantes and Cosmonauts and Kings and RKI and everybody. So it's just me standing here and being part of that process somehow. Yeah. That somehow in between then led to me working on a design system for WHO, but I should not talk about that. But there was also this inspiration in terms of they saw this dashboard. We're like, oh, this is an interesting new approach. Let's see if that transfers. And we did quite a bit of work there in the public health sector. And then also through a few other connections led to my current work with the German Federal Foreign Office, where we look at the relationship of climate change and conflict and local vulnerabilities and how sort of these layers overlap and where different regions of the world are, differently affected by climate change and conflicts and how well they can respond basically to that or not. And that's together with the crisis early warning team at Foreign Office. Melchior Rallenbergers is here if you want to talk to him later, so he can tell you all about crisis early warning. And it also started fairly like lo-fi and fairly quickly, and just basically with this idea a few years ago, there's something there in terms of climate and conflict, let's explore that, right? Can we do something in that space? And so we built a fairly simple website first, just to explore, is that topic interesting? Is there anything relevant we can say about it? And we did this in a few months with a small team. And then it proved to be interesting. And so we later managed to turn this into a larger research project. And I think that's often a story behind the more successful long-term activities, that often they started with a really small, under-the-radar experimental project that then turned out to be, oh yeah, we should scale that to something proper, right? And then often the actual work starts, and sometimes you're also too optimistic because you think, oh, the first 80% are done already, but then you realize, oh, it was different first 80%, but that's sort of a different story. But I think that's, for me, always a lesson is like to start small and then test early if something actually works. And so we teamed up with proper scientists from the PIC, the Potsdam Institute for Climate Research, and the University of the Bundeswehr, the Armed Forces, who did all the number crunching to basically provide us with all these different data layers of very detailed data across the world from these three like realms of climate change, violent conflicts, and political stability or vulnerabilities. And yeah, so the scientists have been working on this large tree of indicators that would help inform all three of these layers. So you can see maybe in the climate change part, there's droughts, there's heat waves, maybe there's a short-term perspective, but there's also a long-term perspective. If you have 3 years of droughts in a row, you know, it's actually worse, and so on. And in the vulnerability sector, you look at, okay, how stable is the political situation? How well is the local government equipped to respond to crisis, right? And then maybe you have ongoing violent conflicts as well. And we try to sort of bring all that together so you can see at the overlap and see, okay, in which regions are these three things coming together. You can't really talk that much about causality in the sense that climate change causes conflicts, but of course it's always worse if you have both happening in a region, right? Yeah, and so the research project is a lot about pulling a lot of these data sources together, and our job is to make it usable in-house, but also communicate it to the public or folks like you know, that it's available and that you can use it and how it roughly looks. So there's both a part of the public website, communicating what are we doing, how do we doing it, so it's sort of science communication almost, more or less advertising like the existence of this data set. And so, yeah, we thought about, okay, how can we present the project in a way that's easy to understand and makes it clear why we need it. And it was partly, I heard, also due to the nice maps that in the end our then Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock presented it at a big conference in a much longer time slot than everybody anticipated, because she was so excited about the project and also because there was something tangible to be shown, right? It's just much easier if you have a nice map rather than just 3 bullet points. Yeah. And then we also work on internal tooling for experts who want to dive into individual situations in individual countries, bring it together with other data sources, yeah, and go into all the different expert views. And it was interesting because we did a lot of user interviews also in-house and realized the research project was set up in one direction, like gridded data, high spatial resolution, all these different data sources. But our experts said, yeah, but I work on a country level. Like, you know, I would really need country scores. And we're like, that's sort of, we'll have to see what to do about that. So there's always this constant negotiation process. And you really need then a team that's also, again, very agile and very can build stuff themselves and respond to these sort of evolving or changing needs. The other thing we learned is print is still super relevant. So a lot of people want a printout of the map for the plane or for the car ride to the airport and stuff like this. And also that in-house communication in the ministry is a lot like social media. People have short attention spans. You need to get your point across. You need to sell information also in a way to higher ups. So a lot of the same principles apply, actually, also for experts. And so, yeah, responding to these learnings, we then built more domain-specific widgets, and also people really ask, again, for very concrete, graspable numbers. So we put so much effort into building this perfect index that is super sophisticated, but in the end, we also needed concrete counts or trends that were very like graspable, where you knew what the unit was and how you show it. And in the end, again, this people perspective, like not how cloudy is the map, somewhere, but how many people are actually affected by a specific kind of climate hazard. This is again and again the thing where people can relate to and where they feel like, yeah, that's something I can also communicate to others. And it's much harder to communicate, oh, it's an 8.3 roughly in that map region, right? So yeah, so I like these more, again, people-focused widgets a lot. Yeah, and then we built a lot of other tools. So we were also a bit like an ongoing like solution team for all the evolving data needs around the project. Yeah. Maybe to wrap up, I think, so what's the value that these sort of dedicated data design teams bring to the project, right? You might wonder, maybe, oh, we have data scientists already, and we can bring in a communication designer maybe at the end to make things pretty, right? That might work too. But I think what we as data viz, like nerds, bring in is often this idea that we have a really clear position towards what the data means. And so, for instance, also in this project, we really went into what can the numbers tell us? Why is it interesting? How does everything actually relate to each other? So we really try to understand the content of what we're visualizing, because then we know what's important and can make decisions about what's important. And sometimes people are surprised that we would have opinions there because, again, they think we're just the decorators, but we sort of really always push for, we also want to highlight something interesting, and so we need to know what it's about, right? So I think this data with an attitude thing comes in. Second thing, I think I mentioned it already, real artistship. So the data viz folks are often very like hands-on and want to try things out immediately. Also because you need to see the data in action to see if it's interesting to look at, right? Or if it's just a flat line or something. And so we build a lot of prototypes and do a lot of actual prototyping with code. And that also helps our stakeholders to immediately have results they can show around, or have a first idea of, yeah, if we would show it like this would be the effect, right? And people, I think, appreciate that a lot. But then you need to also be careful not to be just caught up in this constant lo-fi prototyping and throwaway products. You need to think about how, for the few things that are really important, how can you make them last? And so in this project also we built a design system based on our work so that the other like analysts and the people in the team could sort of make similar looking work or build on our work, and not when we are gone as the experts, everything's back to zero basically. So yeah, we built a big, not huge design system, but a fairly extensive one. But in the end, we realized it's mostly the colors and the fonts in the end that people need, and some chart templates that help them get started. But still, it was good to have this documentation as well. One side effect was also we wanted to have really open source maps and really do proper German perspectives on the maps. And during the project, that sort of evolved. And now we are getting closer to a position where we have an official border data set. It's work in progress. But we're trying, with 2 ministries to get an official German perspective into a map file, and then have a very easy way to host it. So we're using proto maps. And usually if you want to do a map and you use Mapbox or something like this, it's very either expensive and proprietary, or it's very difficult technically to set up. But by using proto maps, we just have this one file, and you can have a style definition, how the map looks. And then you just put this file on a server and reference it like an image almost. And so you can have your own map library with your own data, and it's self-hosted at very low-fi. And that's also something we always push for. If you like book a big consultancy, they will push for something, let's make a really complicated stack that only we can use, And we try to make things so simple that we know it will live on or be reused. And we're working towards making that public. Can't really promise it yet, but we hope that we can sort of make the official German border data set out of that. And finally, if you bring in data viz nerds, you also get a lot of course, stranger views of the data and hopefully maybe new perspectives. So we played a lot with, on the one hand, 3D maps, but also thinking about, okay, how much can the data tell us, or how do you focus attention on different hotspots in the data, being a bit more abstract. Or of course, we thought about, if you just have a world map and you have all these huge areas where nobody lives. Is that actually informative? So we thought about, okay, maybe we take away parts of the countries, where there's less than a certain number of people living, or rescale the map based on the population. So just by actively thinking about what the data means and what we think we should emphasize or highlight, we also try and change minds, as Martin has said, also like the way people think about the data. Yeah. And these things often don't have an immediate application, but sometimes they lead to new ideas or new perspectives. Or maybe in half a year, somebody will say, maybe we should follow that route, and maybe think more about what our visuals actually represent. Yeah, that was a little glimpse in our ongoing work program. This project is wrapping up, but we keep it going. And yeah, maybe to take away, just because somebody calls something a dashboard, does not need to look like this. There's more options. Do we do questions straight away, or do we do it later? However you want it.
Sorry, like 6 questions.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.